Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, or if you're in the United States, good morning. It's good to be with you once again for the third in our series of webinars. We're going to be starting in just a couple of minutes, so we'll give people the chance to get off of their previous virtual meeting and log into this one. So we'll start in just a couple of minutes. Before we do get started, for those of you who are with us already, thanks for coming back if you've already seen some of our webinars, and thanks for coming if this is the first one that you've seen. There are two previous ones which you'll find on YouTube, and we'll be very happy to share that link with you later on. There are also two more coming up in the next Thursdays, so we hope we'll be able to see you for some of those as well. So we're going to get started in just a minute or two. And for those of you who are watching live on YouTube as well, hello to you. We're not going to see your questions, unfortunately. There's only so many screens I can be looking at the moment, but we've got lots of people joining us on our Zoom webinar live and who will be hopefully interacting with us during this webinar. So we'll be able to get all sorts of questions, all sorts of ideas around the subject of slides. Oh yes, we all love slides, don't we? So have a think just before we get started, for those of you who are already here, what is it that you really hate about slides and the way they are used in online meetings? Maybe in general, but specifically in online meetings. So have a think about that, and then we will get started in just a moment or two. So I'm here today also with my colleague Camille, who has been so helpful in getting all of these webinars set up. So Camille will be working the chat during this live webinar. So please put all of your interactions in there. Just say hi to Camille if you want to, but also you can ask your questions in there, and Camille will make sure that I answer them probably towards the end of this webinar. Okay, I'm going to suggest that we get started. So why don't we do that? So welcome everybody to this, the third in our series of Virtual Meeting Revolution webinars. And this one is all about virtual slide success, how to use visual aids in online meetings. It's great to have so many of you here live, both on Zoom and on YouTube. And of course, for those of you watching the replay on YouTube, hello to you as well. I hope you'll be able to make it live to one of our future webinars. So this is the third. We've already covered two so far. One was more of an introduction to how to plan, how to imagine virtual meetings. The second, which was run by my colleague Michael Rickwood, was all about speaking success, how to speak in an engaging way to keep people's attention during an online meeting. So I'm hoping I'm going to be putting in place all of what Michael taught us last week. And in the next ones, we'll be talking about how to set yourself up for success in your home office so that you can be effective in a virtual meeting. And then lastly, how to animate the meeting, not just how to speak, but how to plan the meeting and run the meeting before, during, and after. But today we're really going to be focusing on slides. Good old PowerPoint. We all love PowerPoint, right? So today, as a reminder in this meeting, for those of you who are with us live in Zoom, please ask your questions using the Zoom chat. Everybody is going to be on mute except for me and later on for Camille, for the simple reason that we want to preserve sound quality for all of you watching us or participating live, and also for those who'll be watching on YouTube and for those who'll be watching the replay later on. So sound quality is important. However, we do want to interact with you, so we've got a couple of polls that I'd like to run today. So we've also got the possibility that you ask your questions and give us your comments using the chat. So very much looking forward to seeing everything that you share with us there. I'm planning to talk for 30-35 minutes, really no more, and then open up for questions so that we can try and make this as interactive as we can. So just a reminder of where this fits within the 5 steps for virtual meeting success. So the first step is the foundation. This is where you lay a strong foundation on which you can build. So you imagine who is the audience or who are the participants in your meeting? What is the objective of the meeting? And all that depends on the context of the meeting. So context, objectives, participants, and all those three need to be in harmony. Once you've worked that out, then you can start thinking, what do we do in the meeting? What might we have? Should we have some presentations? Should we have some discussions, some breakout rooms? What are the different ingredients that we could build in to achieve our objectives with these participants? Then you can think about how to structure that into an agenda for your meeting. How long are you going to spend on which section? Who's going to be doing it? Who's going to be leading each part? Then you can think about illustrating it. And that's where we come in today. Will we need some slides? Will we need some documents? So we're not really going to focus so much on documents today, but we will be mentioning them once or twice because they are important and they are not the same as slides. The fifth step, of course, then is connection. So this is where you actually run the meeting, you lead the meeting, and if necessary, you present in the meeting and try to do so in a successful way. Now we've got 5 revolutions. We talk about virtual meeting revolution. There are these 5 revolutions which we aim to put in place, one per stage. So I won't repeat all of them, but the one about illustration is important. And I'd like to share that big on the screen right now because we do need to understand the difference between documents and slides. We use documents for information and slides for attention. So this is a very important point. Far too many people will try to do things with slides, trying to make them a document, and actually they won't succeed. So what I'd like to do just to start off with is to ask you, all of you, those participating, what's wrong with slides? What is it about slides that really doesn't work? Not only in online meetings, but in any kind of presentation. But what do you really dislike about slides and the way they're used in online meetings? So please, those of you who are live, please type this into the chat and Camille and I will make sure that we capture all those points. So is it bullet points? Is it too much information? This is good. I'm seeing some stuff coming in. Thank you. So too much information. If you don't know where to look, then you certainly can't be listening. So too much information is very bad. Thank you, Sam, for that. Bullet points. Nobody loves bullet points, that's for sure. Too much writing, small writing. Absolutely. If things are too small, it's no use. You need to make sure anything you have on your slides, which is shared for people in an online meeting, is big enough so that someone watching on their smartphone is able to read it. So when things are written too small, that's really not going to be helpful. What else don't we like about slides? Right? When everything the speaker says is written, don't we just hate that? So really all the speaker is doing is reading slides to the audience. And the thing is, the audience can read much faster than the speaker can speak. And so they're going to get to the end of a slide, they'll think they've got everything, and they'll wait for the speaker to catch up. And what do they do while the speaker catches up? Well, they don't listen, and they generally will try and do something else. A disconnection. So Ashish has come up with an idea, the disconnection between the text and the illustrations. We're certainly going to come back to this later on. This is where very often you'll see something, there's some text there which gives a message, but it's in contradiction with the image, or the image is just nothing at all to do with it. So we'll certainly be coming back to that. That's really important because what you show needs to be related to everything else on the slide, but also to what you're saying at the time. So there's a number of good things. And Camille, thank you for saying when there is no dog on the slides. Yes, it's always good to have dogs on the slides. And Camille, I put this one there specially for you. I know you love your dogs. In the next webinar, we'll try and put a horse on there just to keep Camille happy. All right, let's move on. We've seen what we hate about slides. Now, somebody had said, oh, hold on, I've got another one from Sam. Thank you, Sam. Not enough contrast with the different colors, which makes it unreadable. Absolutely. Well, we'll come back to that later. Actually, contrast is less of a problem in an online meeting than it is in a live meeting room where you have a projector screen. And if you have an LCD screen or a big like flat TV screen, then the contrast is usually very good. If you've got a projector screen, then the contrast on that is likely to be much worse than what you have on your computer. So at least with an online meeting, everybody has their computer and they should, in theory, be able to see a lot more than on a projector screen, but not always. So that's a great point, Sam. So I'm going to ask Kemi if she can please launch a poll. So we had earlier on, somebody said, we hate bullet points. So what is it that we hate about bullet points? Now, how many bullets should you use on a slide? This is a good question. Should it be 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or possibly 0? Okay, so these are anonymous answers. I'm not going to interrogate you on your answers later on. So we have 6 of you have voted. You should be able to see this in the polling on your Zoom console. So I'm going to give just another few seconds on this. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so some people are saying 3 slides. Nobody, sorry, 3 bullets on a slide. Nobody said 7, which is good, because very often, I mean, there have been books which have actually said you should use 7 bullet points on a slide, and each bullet point should have 7 words maximum. That makes 49 words on a slide, which is far too many, but that actually is real, a real number. Somebody has 4, which is fine. So I'm going to share the results here, and hopefully you'll be able to see those. The majority of you, however, said 0, and I'm glad about that. I didn't vote myself, but I certainly would have said 0, because frankly, bullet points are the kind of thing which just remind people of all of the bad presentations they've seen in the past. There's nothing wrong with using lists. Just try not to use the typical bullet points. So I'll be using some slides today. I'll be using lists. I'll be using some different things, right? But we're not going to have too many bullets, except when I'm showing what not to do. So let's get into looking at what not to do and what to do when we come to illustration. Okay, so trying to get rid of the polls there. So when it comes to illustration, what I'm going to go through today is really 3 points, or 3 parts of this this particular meeting. Firstly, how to score with slides. That's more general. So this is going to be useful for any kind of presentation you do using slides. Then we'll look at virtual slide success, how to succeed when we are actually in an online meeting, because some things are a bit different in terms of how you use your visual aids. And then lastly, we'll get into the question and answer. And based on the last webinars we've had a lot of questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer some of those and give you some more ideas. So I want to make sure we leave some time for those. So without any further ado, let's move into this. So let's move forward into the first part, how to score with slides. And it's very important first to understand what we don't do. This is the kind of slide which you see far too often. And this is exactly the kind of slide that I think it was Sam was talking about earlier on, where there's so much text and the speaker is going to probably just read all of this text. But the difficulty is that the audience is going to read it and they can read faster than the speaker can. And so many of you live watching this now are probably actually reading this text instead of listening to me. Because if I put all of this text up there, then you need to choose either you listen or you read, or you maybe try and do both. And I need to choose, do I just read it to you? In which case I know you'll disconnect because you read too fast. Or do I say something different, which is what I'm doing now? And that means that you choose either to read or to listen, and you're going to miss one of them, because I'm very sorry to say the human brain does not allow us to read one thing and listen to something different at the same time. The brain just doesn't work that way. So when you're in an online meeting and you see a slide like this, what are you going to do? Very simple. You'll read it because you don't want it to disappear before you finish reading. And then as soon as you've finished, you'll just assume, okay, right, well, wake me up when we get to the new slide, and then you'll probably multitask, which means do something different. And it means you'll check your Facebook, you'll check your email, you'll check your makeup or whatever it might be, and you might actually not check back in again. So this is not a good thing. And this is something which we call a slidument. This is Gar Reynolds. Now, Gar is the author of a fantastic book on presentations. Many of you will know. It's called Presentation Zen. This is where you apply the Japanese principles of restraint, simplicity, and naturalness, and you put those into a typical presentation, and you find that it actually works extremely well. Now, Presentation Zen is now on its third edition. Here is a picture of me reading the third edition of Presentation Zen just last month. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me right now because all our copies of Presentation Zen third edition are in our office in Paris, and we're not allowed to go there. Therefore, I only have the second edition up with me here. I don't have the third. Anyway, way back in the first edition, Gar came up with a new word, which I love, and that is a slidument. A slidument is what happens when you take a slide and a document and you try to put them together and kill two birds with one stone. And guess what? It doesn't work. No, I mean, seriously, it doesn't work. That is a major problem because that you end up putting so much stuff onto your screen, onto your slide, because you think, well, I'm going to be able to share this as a handout later on, and therefore I need people to understand some things, which means you put so much text that then people read it and they don't listen. And it's not even a very useful document. Look at something like this. It's not a very useful document. So what we're doing with these webinars, we are giving you a document to take away which summarizes what we see in the webinar. So long after you've forgotten what I'm saying today, you will at least have the possibility to see, to understand, thanks to the document and also the replay of the webinar. So this document is in the form of an article on our website, and for all those of you participating live on the Zoom here or who signed up for this webinar, we'll be sending that link to you via email. For everyone else, you can find that on our website. So what we don't want to be doing is therefore having a slide which tries to be a document and a document which tries to be a slide. It just doesn't work. It really doesn't. And the difference between a slide and a document is actually quite marked. If you think about it, what makes a good slide? Well, firstly, a slide is something which is aimed to be projected onto a wall behind you or onto a screen somewhere or onto other people's screen, as we're doing right now. It's something which is going to therefore be printed, ideally. It's a document, I apologize, is something which is not for projecting. It's something which is going to be printed or which could be printed, and that makes it a different kind of format. A slide is something which should support what you are saying. It is not the message. You shouldn't have everything you're saying on there. It's a visual aid which supports what you're saying. Whereas a document needs to be standalone. So the article we're putting on our website about this webinar actually does need to be clear for anybody who is not there today and who's not even seen this video. A slide is something which people will watch. That means that they're using the visual channel of their brain, not the linguistic channel, because the linguistic channel is busy listening to the speaker, but they should be using a visual channel to be watching the slide, not so much reading it. Whereas a document is something that they are very clearly going to want to read. And that makes it something very different. When it comes to a slide, you really only want to put key words on the slide. Not too many words, otherwise people will read instead of watching. So just a few key words. And you see what I'm doing here. Here I am putting words just at the point when they are necessary, not before. And this way you only see exactly what I'm talking about at the point, even if the rest is actually still there. A document, you don't want just keywords, you actually do need complete sentences. You really do need to make sure that this document is properly standalone and therefore it does have complete sentences. You're going to want, ideally on your slides, a dark background. Now this is less important when you're talking about online slides, but in a meeting room, having a dark background very often is much easier on the eyes of the audience. You don't want to have too much light, it will just tire their eyes. And you really want to keep people awake as much as possible. Whereas in a document, you do want to have a white background because people might print it and you don't want them to be printing things unnecessarily. And that can be very bad for the planet with all of that use of toner or ink. So just try to have a white background for your documents. And then on a last point, a slide is something which should avoid what we can call visual pollution. That's all of those things that don't actually need to be there, like your logo doesn't always need to be there. The page number doesn't always need to be there. The confidentiality notice in 8-point text that nobody can read at the bottom of the screen, which actually doesn't need to be there and doesn't have any legal value on something which is projected, but is very useful in a document because all of that visual pollution actually becomes metadata. Because in a document, you want to have the page numbers. You want to know who wrote the document. You want to know when it was written. If you have your date on every slide, you really need to remind people what day it is on each slide. If so, then your presentation might be just a bit too long. Whereas in a document, it's really helpful. So what we can see here is that on every level, a slide and a document should be completely different from each other. It's not like the difference between a cat and a dog. A cat and a dog, they both have 4 legs and a tail, and they're a little bit furry. Well, some more than others. No, it's the difference between a cat and a tomato. These are just 2 really completely different things. It's like the difference between black and white. How can we imagine that we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone? So when it comes to our online meetings, we really do need to understand what makes a document. This is the kind of thing we share before the meeting or after the meeting, or potentially a small document during the meeting that people can read in silence and then come back and discuss about, versus the slides, which are there for attention. So remember that revolution. You use documents for information, slides are there for attention. Now, how many slides should you actually have in a presentation? We've got another poll on this. I'd like to see if we can launch that poll. So Camille, if I can ask you to launch the second poll, which is if you have, for example, a 10-minute presentation in an online meeting, how many slides should you use? And even though one of the correct answers is going to be, it depends, that's not one of the available answers. So how many slides do you think you probably should be having for a typical 10-minute online presentation? So let's just give you a couple of moments to answer that, and then we will see. So we've got answers which range between 0 and 50. 50 slides in 10 minutes? Well, it's entirely possible to use a lot. But you don't always need to. So we're seeing, I'm just going to give just another 5 seconds. And then 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's share those results then, please, Camille. And then hopefully everyone will see that. So the answers that you've given is 80% of you have said 5 slides for a 10-minute online presentation. Some have said, well, one person said 15, one person said 20. Well, I'm going to agree with the person who said 20. Now, again, the correct answer is it depends. In some cases, you don't need too many slides. In some cases, you'll have one slide which builds up with several different elements, and then you'll discuss about it or whatever. But when you're in a real presentation situation like I am now, when I'm speaking to all of you, and it's kind of a monologue because of the way this webinar is set up and to preserve the sound quality, well, in that case, you really do want to be changing the slide fairly regularly so that it keeps people's attention. Because remember, the slides are for attention. So let's stop sharing that one now. Thank you for your input on that poll. Now, the slides are for attention and in two ways. The first way is to get their attention. So you should be using slides which don't look very boring like a typical business document as much as possible. It should be something which actually grabs their attention and makes them want to be listening and makes them engaged. And remember, slides can be not only giving information, they can also ask questions. And if you put in a kind of a rhetorical question on the slide, well, what that can do is it actually can then make people think, okay, interesting, I'll listen to hear the answer. So a good slide should help people to listen more. So that's the first thing, get their attention. And then once you've got their attention, direct their attention. Now, how are you going to direct their attention? Firstly, if you have a look at what I have here, this is the agenda, if you remember, for this meeting. And I've directed your attention there by using, if I use my pointer here, you'll see that firstly, the active part of the agenda is in bold and orange. And secondly, I've put a little Ideas on Stage logo next to it, which makes it clear this is where we are and that's what we should be focusing on right now. So you can use slides to direct their attention to what they should be focusing on at the time. And structure slides are very useful. I'm going to be coming back to that later on. So how are we going to score with these slides? That's what we need to be talking about now. Now, SCORE actually is an acronym, and we apply SCORE as part of our presentation SCORE method to all aspects of presentations. And SCORE stands for simple, clear, original, related, and enjoyable. So let's have a look at what that means for slides. First off, simple. How do you make slides simple? Like this clock that we see on the screen here. This clock has only two hands. It's telling us the hours and minutes. There is no second hand, doesn't tell us the date, doesn't tell us the phases of the moon like some interesting watches might do. Nope, it's simply just telling us the time. And that's what a slide should do. It should only tell us this absolute minimum. A good slide should respect the 5-second rule. And the 5-second rule, what that means is that when you show something on the screen, which I've just done with this particular slide, which has 5 seconds and then a stopwatch, which is set to 5 seconds, what you want is that they understand everything just within 5 seconds. That way, they keep listening. If they can't understand it all within 5 seconds, it means they're probably starting to read and they're probably going to stop listening. And that is a problem because you really need them to be paying attention. So let me do something now. I'm going to ask you to take a look at this next slide for 5 seconds, and then we're going to see whether you got everything. Ready? Let's go. Okay, that was 5 seconds. Did you get everything on that slide? Really? No, I don't think so. There was far, far too much on there. Far too much stuff. I mean, there are two different graphs. There's stuff which is too small. It's really hard to be working out exactly what each part is supposed to be meaning. There are colors which are reused as well. It's just far too complicated. Let's try something else. Let's try again. 5 seconds. Are we ready? Go. Now, did we get all of that? Now, typically, people do get everything there just within 5 seconds. Why? Because there isn't too much. There is not too much stuff on there. You really only have a simple title, which gives you the overview. Revenues grew 30% in the first quarter. So we know that. If you only read the title, you get it. Then the second part is going to be, well, you see the graph. You don't need to have on that graph something here which might say, if I try to annotate this, you could have had something along this axis here, which has, for example, an axis where this might say sort of 0 and then 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. I'm not obviously not spaced quite like that, but still, the point is we don't need any of that. We don't need any of that, and we've taken all of it away because it's not necessary. It's not necessary because the 20 and 26 are proportional. You can see 20 to 26. Okay, yeah. And so you don't even need the title. You could take away the title. Should we take away the title? We could. We can simply say, all right, Q1 revenues, there we are. And then you might think, okay, but 20 to 26, that's good growth, but how much is that? That's 30% growth. Okay, maybe we make it a bit easier by just adding the 30% to people, to the slide. Makes it easier for people. Always try to make it really simple. So all of these three options would have followed that 5-second rule. So remember the words of Saint-Exupéry. Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. So take away everything you don't need on your slides. Take away everything that's not necessary, and then you have their attention exactly where you want it on what you do want them to see. So that's the first rule, make your slides simple. The second one is to make them clear. Now here we have two clocks on the Queen Elizabeth Tower in London. Now they're simple clocks, just the hours and minutes. However, they need to be visible from a long way away, just like what's on your slide needs to be visible on somebody's smartphone, or if you're in a meeting room, at the back of the room. So the first aspect is that text really should be easy to read. Now there's some text on my slide here. How easy is that for you to read? Would it be possible to read that on a smartphone? I don't think so. So always, if you're not sure your text is big enough, it's not big enough. Make it bigger. The second thing then is to be thinking about contrast. So when you think of contrast, you need to make sure that things show up properly on their screens. Now, this is a trick slide. Have you seen the trick in this slide? Because actually, there is something down here. If I use my pen in PowerPoint here, then you should be able to see somewhere down here, there is actually some text. Can you see that? You probably didn't see it first. Why? Because what you see first of all is the text of contrast, and then you see this nice orange pen over here, and your eye doesn't necessarily go back to the bottom left. But now I've outlined it, well, you're going to be able to see that. Now, what I've just done, by the way, is using a very simple PowerPoint tool, which is going to be able to outline the text. As soon as I advance my slide, it's going to disappear. So here we have the same text in a slightly better color, but still not quite right. Now I'm going to use my zoom pen to try to draw something around it. And there, if I outline the text here now, what's interesting now is that when I come back to my PowerPoint and I want to advance my PowerPoint, then actually you will see that it's going to stay there. So in my PowerPoint, there we are. I've now got a different slide which has a much better text color. And now you can actually see, compared to the previous one, this is much easier. So always, firstly with your contrast, always make sure that things are easy to read for the person who's on the other end. And then secondly, I've just used that to explain the difference between the PowerPoint pen and the Zoom pen, because the Zoom pen will stay there until you get rid of it, which is what I'm exactly going to do right now. So let's now move ahead, because that's the point about clarity. Make sure everything is big enough and make sure the contrast is clear for everyone. After that, you want to make things original. Now, here's another clock. You see everything's all related to time here. Here's another clock, but this is the kind of clock you may not have seen before. And that's what you need with slides. You need slides that people haven't seen before, something that makes them pay attention because it's new and interesting. So not this. What you don't want is to give them that sense of déjà vu with all of these typical bullet points, the white background, the boring clip art, which was potentially useful in the 1990s, but it's really not cool anymore. And once again, you're probably reading all of this because, well, it's slightly funny and it mentions the Macarena, but you're still realizing that, yes, indeed, I'm reading and I should be listening instead. So, yep, sorry, I got you again, didn't I? But yeah, your mind will associate a slide like this with all of the thousands of death by PowerPoints they've felt in the past, and they won't want to feel it again. So you really don't want to be having slides which look like that. Make them different, make them stand out. Use your slides to get their attention and then to direct their attention. And that will make all the difference. So that's being original. So simple, clear, original. We also want to make sure everything is related. So just like all of the different cogs and wheels in the clockwork of a watch, you need to make sure that what you show on the screen is related to what you're saying at the time, and that any text and any images are also related to each other. Now, I learned this back when I was a sales director back at Hewlett-Packard many years ago, and I was preparing a sales presentation for a client. And so I had a slide which looked like this. Yes, I know, I used to use bullet points. I'm sorry, I've I've repented, but I used to do this. And I had some short bullet points. I actually had some space on my slide. So I looked in the official guidelines, the official template, what images am I allowed to use? And I found one which was just the right shape. It was a picture of some tall buildings. And I thought, okay, that's good. It makes the slide look a little bit less ugly and a little bit less empty. When I was in my meeting with the client, I was going through my presentation perfectly well. And then at this slide, the client stopped me and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Waknell, why do you have a picture of buildings on your slide?" I was selling IT services. This was not his building. This was not my building. What could I say? It seemed a little bit ugly without it. No, I did not have a good answer to that question. And that's when I realized you can't put anything that's not related on your slide because it will reduce the effect of what you actually do want them to be paying attention to. There is no point putting something unrelated. It's just, it has the same effect as putting something which is completely opposite to your message. Like, here, nice clear strategy. No, maybe not. Or, we're going to double our revenue in 2020. Well, unless you're Zoom, you're probably not. So we do need to make sure that what we show on the slide is related to what we are saying at the time, not before, not afterwards. And then lastly, we need to make our slides enjoyable. We need to make them pleasant to look at, which means not too many fonts altogether. Now, why have I represented this with a very old time device, the kind of the sand timer or the egg timer, or hourglass if you prefer? Simply because the attention of the participants in an online meeting, just like in any presentation, is going to run out, just like the grains of sand in that sand timer. So you, as the animator or the presenter or the speaker, you need to turn that over every few minutes, every 5-10 minutes. You need to do something to break things up, to grab people's attention again, to turn that over. Now, that can be as simple as running a poll or asking a question or showing something surprising, but very often using an interesting slide is a good way to do that. So if we put all of that together, simple, clear, original, related, and enjoyable, then we're going to get the score. And we have a little P up here. If those of you who are looking at this P, this does not stand for fill, this stands for presentation, because this is part of the presentation score method, which we can borrow and apply to our online meetings. But it is important for us also then to bear in mind what's different with online slides. So I've got 3 things which are things we should avoid, and 3 things which we should use when we're using slides in online meetings. So let's take a look at those now. Just as a reminder, we will be taking your questions afterwards. So if you have questions, please do put them into the chat, and Camille will make sure I answer those just a little bit later on. So what do we do in terms of things to avoid? So there are 3 things I usually recommend we avoid in online presentations. The first one is animations. Why avoid animations? Well, animations can be great in live presentations. They can be really interesting in some cases. Now, you don't want to be having things bounce around, like here's a new bullet point. That's not really something that you want to be doing. It doesn't make you look very serious. But you can sometimes use animations, like I did, for example, in my recent TEDx talk, where here we have an animation where you see information going into someone's head and or into one ear and out of another. Now, I usually wouldn't use that in an online meeting, because what you probably saw is that that animation didn't go smoothly. It probably went tuk, 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 like it was in stop motion. And so this is one of the reasons why you should not use animations. Refresh rates are not very good. On your screen, you might have a refresh rate of like 50 times a second, or 50 hertz, or even 100 hertz. They won't have that at the other end. So because the refresh rates are poor, it's better not to use those animations. Also, don't use transitions, the kind of transition which moves from one slide to the other with, for example, a dissolve. It can look nice, but sometimes because of the refresh rate, it gets stuck. And so people see half of one slide and half of another for a second or two. It doesn't look great. You can use builds. So build, what this would be, is where you have different elements on the screen which arrive one at a time when you click. Just make sure that they're using the animation which is called appear, which means that there's no movement, it just comes up on the screen. It doesn't move in, it doesn't wipe in, it doesn't fade in, it doesn't bounce in, it just appears. And that way you can know what they're seeing and you can know that it will look as smooth as possible on the other end. For very similar reasons, it's best to avoid using sound and videos. Now, this can work very nicely. If you want to turn over that egg timer and wake people up in a live presentation in a meeting room, using a video is fantastic. However, when we're talking about an online meeting, because those refresh rates are poor, video isn't really very helpful. The sound may not work. You might have a nice sound effect somewhere within your PowerPoint, but it might not transmit to the other end because the sound is what's going into your microphone, not necessarily what's coming out of your computer speakers. And even if it does get through to the other end, the quality might be low. So I usually will recommend don't use sound, don't use video in online presentations. And then the last one, this might surprise you a little bit, is gradients. Now, gradients, this is where you have, for example, a background on your slide which has one color at the top and another one at the bottom. This may look great on your screen. Apple uses these all the time, for example, a gradient background. That's part of their style. It looks good, but not always at the other end of an online meeting, because on the other end of an online meeting, they will have less or lower color definition, and therefore your gradient might just look like a whole lot of stripes. Now, I like stripes. Stripes can be fine, but if you're not intending to have stripes, best to avoid showing a gradient. It might not work so well. So those are three things to avoid. Avoid the animations, avoid sound and video, avoid gradient type backgrounds and shapes if you can. What are the three things which can help you in online meetings? Well, these are the things to use. The first one is going to be structure. You can use your slides for structure. The second is to use the annotation features. And the third is visual pauses. So let's have a look at each of those. Let's start off with the structure. Now, you notice here that I have that nice orange point here. You see my mouse pointer moving there. So we have the Little Ideas on Stage logo, which represents this is what we're talking about right now. Remember what I said earlier about directing people's attention. So that's where we are right now. That's the thing to be looking at. And what you'll see is that exactly this slide is a structure slide. It reminds you of where we've come from, and it reminds you of what's coming and where we are now. This is very important in online meetings, because what happens in online meetings? People get disturbed. They will get disturbed by an email coming in from their boss, which they need to deal with quickly. They will get disturbed by the cat knocking over a glass. They will get disturbed by their children making a lot of noise in the background. They get disturbed by all sorts of things. And it may be that they actually miss a few minutes of your meeting and they have to come back in after 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes. In which case it's useful to have structure slides regularly throughout what you're presenting and throughout the meeting, so that anybody who got lost can find themselves again. So structure slides can be very helpful. Now, annotation, this is what we used a little bit earlier on, and this is where, for example, you can use your Zoom annotation to do all sorts of things if you're using Zoom. So I can put a spotlight over here. You can hopefully see my red spotlight next to the annotation piece. I can put a stamp there. I can put, for example, a little star right next to the annotation piece. And I can also remove that if I want to. I could outline it. I can draw my outline all the way around. Whoop, this is what we're talking about right now. Now, this is the kind of thing, don't overuse it, but use it a bit if you can. Just remember the difference. The ones that you use in Zoom or Teams or whatever it might be, these are ones which sometimes anyone can use. And I see that somebody has been scribbling on my slide. I'm glad that some people are enjoying this. And the ones in PowerPoint, you can use those, but you, as the person sharing, you're the only one who can actually use those. the annotations can be great for collaboration. So I'm now going to clear all of this, hopefully, off of my screen and stop the annotation. And then we're going to move on to visual pauses. So visual pauses are important. Now, in a live presentation, I always recommend using black slides. The black slide is the world's best slide. What happens when you project a black slide onto the wall behind you? Well, people think the projector's switched off or that there's just nothing to see, and therefore their focus comes directly back on you as the speaker. If you're going to tell a story or give an example or something, then a black slide is fantastic. If there's nothing you need to show, if nothing you need to project, well, nothing is that black slide. What happens, however, if you do this in an online presentation? People will think there's a technical problem. So what is good in a live presentation is not so good in an online presentation. So you can do one of several things to have a visual pause so that people focus mostly back on you. One, you could put your logo in the middle there. So there we are, here's our logo. Is that helpful? Well, not always. If you're in an internal meeting, do you really need to remind people that this is your company logo? Not always. So it might be useful in some cases, it might not be useful in others. You could put the meeting agenda, you could put something here. So here we are, this is what we're doing today. There's nothing else that needs to be shown, so I could put something on the screen which just reminds people of what we're doing and why we're here and what's the meeting purpose, for example. That's possible too. But you could, if you wanted, just use the most important visual of all to give that visual pause. And the most important visual of all is you. And that's where you can simply stop sharing your screen, and then you'll be able to give gestures. People will actually see your face much better than in that small window in the top corner of the screen. And that way you can get more things across if you want to. So I'm actually going to start sharing again, but that was a visual pause, which I can certainly recommend using from time to time. So those are the things which we should avoid, and some of the things which we should use for successful online meetings. And now is going to be time to take your questions. So if you have a question, please do type it into the chat window, and I am going to get that open. And then Camille, I'm sure, has been getting one or two questions already. Camille, if you can unmute yourself and ask me some questions, I will be very grateful.
Yeah, well, thanks, Phil. I actually learned a lot of things as well, so that's good that I was here. Sam is asking, where do you get your illustrations and pictures from? And can you suggest a website or link?
Okay, excellent question, Sam. Thank you, Camille. So there are several places where you could get your images from. There are some free ones like Pixabay, which is a good site, pixabay.com, or unsplash.com can be good as well. I get most of mine from istockphoto.com. So we're a design company at Ideas on Stage, so we actually have a monthly subscription for images at istockphoto.com. And we find that it's pretty good value for money. The quality is excellent. They've got a very, very wide range of stuff. So I'm not going to do an advertisement for them. There are others. There's Adobe Stock, which I think is a good one. Shutterstock is a good one as well. But you do pay for these images. If you want free ones, don't go to Google search. Don't try and steal something, because that is stealing. If you go to a search engine and simply find an image that you like and borrow it, well, actually, no, you probably don't have the rights to use that. There's copyright, there's image rights. If you get your image from iStock Photo, then you're sure that, or one of the similar sites, then you're sure it is a reasonable, a legal photo where there's no copyright problem and you've got the image rights signed off by all of the people in the pictures. If you don't have budget, Pixabay is a good option. Unsplash is a good option.
Actually, there's no other question for now.
Okay, well, it seems like it's actually been pretty clear for everyone. So I'm very pleased to hear that, and I'm glad that you appreciated it. So if there are no further questions, then I'll simply move on with my final few words. So just as a reminder, remember to make your slides simple, clear, original, related, and enjoyable. So not too much on each slide. Everything should be easy to see for somebody watching on a smartphone in terms of size and contrast. Make it different, make it original, make it something they haven't seen before. Only use things which are related to what you're saying and make it enjoyable to see. And when you're thinking about what goes online in a presentation, remember those things to avoid, remember those things to use, and you will see those in the article which we'll be publishing tomorrow, which will also include the replay of the video on YouTube for those of you who wanted to see this again. So remember, we've got another couple of webinars still to come. We've already had one about the foundation and ideation phases of preparing an online meeting. We've also had one about the connection, which was last week with Michael, which was very well appreciated in how to speak in an online meeting to grab and keep people's attention. And then the next one, so next week, my colleague Pierre will be going through how to set yourself up in your home office to succeed in online meetings. And then I'll be back in 2 weeks from now and we talking about how to facilitate the meetings to make sure they're set up for success and how to run the meeting, even if you're not presenting, before, during, and after. So next week, will be all about the home office. I encourage you to please sign up. You can find the links on our website or follow us on LinkedIn. I'm sure Pierre will do something really fantastic next week, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time today. I hope this has given you something useful, and I hope that your next virtual meeting will be a real success. So from Camille, from myself, from all of us at Ideas on Stage, thanks very much and enjoy your next online meetings. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.